God's grace and peace to you and Merry Christmas. Whether you're watching this first thing in the morning, later on in the day, or some other time, I hope this culmination of the Christmas Day experience fills you with joy and wonder, and most importantly, love. May the light of Christ fill you this day more than all others, that you might proclaim the goodness of God, the amazing compassion, mercy, and forgiveness of the Divine One, and the call on our hearts to do the work that Christ has called us to do. Would you join me in prayer? Come to the light and be gathered to Christ. Christ dwells in our midst as the light, not overcome in darkness, as the shepherd gathering us home from every place of exile and distress. He is the gift of God who cherishes us with unspeakable love. Come to the light. Be gathered to Christ. Let us worship together. As something a little different for Christmas Day, something a little unusual for normal worship, today I'd like to share with you a series of a few stories, some Christmas stories that have stuck with me through the years that remind me of the true meaning of Christmas and a little bit of fun, a little bit of legend in there too. So this first story I'm going to share with you is called Christmas Day in the Morning by the very famous author Pearl S. Buck. He woke suddenly and completely. It was 4 o'clock, the hour which his father had always called him to get up and help with the milking. Strange how the habits of his youth clung to him still. 50 years ago, and his father had been dead for nearly 30 years, and yet he waked at 4 o'clock in the morning. He had trained himself to turn over and go to sleep, but this morning was Christmas, and he did not try to sleep. Why did he feel so awake tonight? He slipped back in time as he did so easily nowadays. He was 15 years old again and still on his father's farm. He loved his father. He had not known it until one day a few years before Christmas when he had overheard what his father was saying to his mother. "Mary, I hate to call Rob in the mornings. He's growing up so fast and he needs his sleep. If you could see how he sleeps when I go to wake him up. Oh, I wish I could manage alone." "Well, you can't, Adam." His mother's voice was brisk. "Besides, he isn't a child anymore. It's time he took his turn." "Yes," his father said slowly, "but I do sure hate to wake him." When he heard these words, something in him spoke. His father loved him. He had never thought of it that way before, taking for granted the tie of their blood. Neither his father nor his mother talked about loving their children. They had no time for such things. There was just always so much to do on the farm. Now that he knew that his father loved him, there would be no loitering in the mornings, having to be called again. He got up after that, stumbling blindly in his sleep, and pulled on his clothes, his eyes shut. But he got up. And then, on the night before Christmas, that year when he was 15, he lay for a few minutes thinking about the next day. They were poor, and most of the excitement was in the turkey they had raised themselves and the mince pies that Mother had made. His sisters sewed their presents, and his mother and father always bought him something he needed. Not just a warm jacket, maybe, but something more, like a book. And he saved and bought them each something too. He wished that Christmas, when he was 15, he had a better present for his father. As usual, he had gone to the 10-cent store and bought a tie. It seemed nice enough until he lay thinking the night before Christmas. He looked out his attic window, and the stars were so bright. "Dad," he once asked when he was a little boy, "what's a stable?" "It's just a barn," his father said, "like ours." Then Jesus had been born in a barn, and to the barn the shepherds had come. The thought struck him like a silver dagger. Why should he not give his father a special gift too, out there in the barn? He could get up early, earlier than 4 o'clock, and he could creep into the barn and get all the milking done. He'd do it alone, milk and clean up, and then when his father went to start the milking, he'd see it all done, and he would know who had done it. He laughed to himself as he gazed at the stars. It was what he would do, and he mustn't sleep too sound. He must awake 20 times, scratching a match each time to look at his old watch. Midnight, 1:30, then 2 o'clock. At 2:45, he got up and put his clothes on. He crept downstairs, careful of the creaky boards, and let himself out. The cows looked at him, sleepy and surprised. It was early for them, too. He'd never milked alone before, but it seemed almost easy. He kept thinking about his father's surprise. His father would come in and get him, saying that it's time to get started while Rob was getting dressed. He'd go to the barn and open the door, and then he'd go to get the 2 big empty milk cans, but they wouldn't be waiting or empty. They'd be standing in the milk house, filled. "What the?" he could hear his father exclaiming. He smiled and milked steadily, 2 strong streams rushing in the pail, frothing and fragrant. The task went more easily than he had ever known it to go before. Milking, for once, was not a chore. It was something else, a gift to his father who loved him. He finished. The 2 milk cans were full, and he covered them and closed the milk house door carefully, making sure of the latch. Back in his room, he only had a minute or so to pull off his clothes in the darkness, jump into bed, for he heard his father getting up. He put the covers over his head to silence his quick breathing. The door opened. "Rob," his father called him, "got to get up, son, even though it is Christmas." "All right," he said sleepily. The door closed, and he lay still, laughing to himself. In just a few minutes, his father would know. His dancing heart was ready to jump from his body. The minutes were endless, 10, 15, he didn't know how many, and then he heard his father's footsteps again. The door opened, and he lay still. "Rob!" "Yes, Dad?" His father was laughing, a strange sobbing sort of laugh. "Thought you'd fool me, didn't you?" His father was standing by his bed, feeling for him, pulling away the cover. "It's for Christmas, Dad." He found his father and clutched him in a great hug. He felt his father's arms go around him. It was dark, and they could not see each other's faces. "Son, I thank you. Nobody ever did a nicer thing. Oh, Dad, I want you to know. I want to do good." The words broke from him of their own will. He did not know what to say. His heart was bursting with love. He got up and pulled his clothes on again, and they went down to the Christmas tree. Oh, what a Christmas, and how his heart had nearly burst again with the shyness and pride as his father told his mother and made the younger children listen about how he, Rob, had gotten up all by himself. The best Christmas gift I ever had, and I'll remember it, son, every year on Christmas morning, so long as I live. They had both remembered it, and now that his father was gone, he remembered it alone. That blessed Christmas dawn, when alone with the cows in the barn, he had made his first gift of true love. This Christmas he wanted to write a card to his wife to tell her how much he loved her. It had been a long time since he'd really told her, although he loved her in a very special way, much more than he ever had when they were young. He had been fortunate that she had loved him. And that was the true joy of life, the ability to love. Love was still alive in him, still was. And it occurred to him suddenly that it was alive because long ago it had been born in him when he knew that his father had loved him. That was it. Love alone could awaken love, and he could give the gift again and again. This morning, this blessed Christmas morning, he would give the gift to his beloved wife. He could write down a letter for her to read and keep forever. He went to his desk and began his love letter to his wife. My dearest love. This story is called Christmas at Red Butte by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Of course Santa Claus will come, said Jimmy confidently. Jimmy was 10, and at 10 it's easy to be confident. Why, he's got to come because it's Christmas Eve, and he always has come. You know that, twins. Yes, the twins knew it, and cheered by Jimmy's superior wisdom, their doubts passed away. There had been one terrible moment. Theodora had sighed and told them they mustn't be too disappointed if Santa Claus did not come this year, because the crops had been poor, and he might not have had enough presents to get all the way around the world. Well, that doesn't make any difference to Santa Claus, scoffed Jimmy. You know as well as I do, Theodora, that Santa Claus is rich, whether the crops fail or not. They failed 3 years ago before Father died, but Santa Claus came all the same. Probably you don't remember it, twins, because you were too little, but I do. Of course he'll come, so don't you worry a mite. And I'll bring my skates and your dolls. He knows we're expecting them, Theodora, because we wrote him a letter last week and threw it up the chimney. And there'll be candy and nuts, of course. And Mother's gone to town to buy a turkey. I tell you, we're going to have a ripping Christmas. Well, don't use such slangy words about it, Jimmy boy, sighed Theodora. She couldn't bear to dampen their hopes any further, and perhaps Aunt Elizabeth might manage it if the colt sold well. But Theodora had her painful doubts. She sighed again, and she looked out the window, far down the trail that wound across the prairie, red lighted by the declining sun of the short wintry afternoon. "Do people always sigh like that when they get to be 16? Asked Jimmy curiously. "You didn't sigh like that when you're only 15, Theodora. I wish you wouldn't. It makes me feel funny, and not the nice kind of funniness either." "It's a bad habit I've gotten into lately," said Theodora, trying to laugh. "Old folks are dull sometimes, you know, Jimmy boy." 16 is awfully old, isn't it?" said Jimmy reflectively. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do when I'm 16, Theodora. I'm going to pay off the mortgage and buy Mother a silk dress and a piano for the twins, and that'll be elegant. I'll be able to do it, of course, because I'm a man. Of course, I was a girl. I probably couldn't." "I hope you'll be a good, kind, brave man and a real help to your mother," said Theodora softly, sitting down before the cozy fire, lifting the fat little twins into her lap. "Oh, I'll be good to her, never you fear," assured Jimmy, squatting comfortably down on the fur rug before the stove. The skin of the coyote made the rug that his father had killed 4 years ago. "I believe in being good to your mother when you've only got one. Now tell us a story, Theodora. A real jolly story, with lots of fighting in it. Only please don't kill anybody. I like to hear about the fighting, but I like to have all the people come out alive." Theodora laughed and began a story about a rebellion of '85, a story which had the double merit of being true and exciting at the same time. It was quite dark when she finished, and the twins were nodding, but Jimmy's eyes were wide and sparkling. "That was great," he said, drawing a long breath. "Tell us another." No, it's bedtime for you all," said Theodora firmly. "One story's my rule, you know that." "But I want to sit up till Mother comes," objected Jimmy. "You can't. She might be very late, for she would have to wait to see Mr. Porter. Besides, you don't know what time Santa Claus might come, if he comes at all. If he were to drive along and see you children up instead of being sound asleep in bed, he might go right in and pass and never come up at all." Well, this argument was clearly too much for Jimmy. "All right, we'll go. But we have to hang up our stockings. Twins, get yours." The twins toddled off in great excitement and brought back their Sunday stockings, which Jimmy proceeded to hang on the edge of the mantel shelf. This done, they all trooped obediently off to bed. Theodora gave another sigh and seated herself at the window where she could watch the moonlit prairie for Mrs. Martin's homecoming and knit at the same time. I'm afraid that you will think from all the sighing that Theodora was doing that she was a very melancholy and despondent young lady. You couldn't think of anything more unlike the real Theodora. She was the jolliest, bravest girl of 16 in all of Saskatchewan, and her shining brown eyes and rosy dimpled cheeks would have told you, and her sighs were not on her own account, but simply for the fear that the children would be disappointed. She knew that they would be almost heartbroken if Santa Claus did not come, and that it hurt the patient, hard-working little mother more than all else. 5 years before, Theodora had come to live with Uncle George and Aunt Elizabeth in a little log house in Red Butte. Her own mother had just died, and Theodora only had her big brother Donald, and he had just left because he had Klondike fever. The Martins were poor, but they lived gladly and made room for their little niece, and Theodora lived there ever since, her aunt's right-hand girl and the beloved playmate of the children. She'd been very happy until Uncle George's death 2 years before this Christmas Eve. But since then, things had been hard in the little log house, and although Mrs. Martin and Theodora did their best, it was a woefully hard task to both make ends meet, especially this year when the crops had been so poor. Theodora and her aunt had made every sacrifice possible for her children's sake, and at least Jimmy and the twins had not felt the pinch severely yet. At 7, Mrs. Martin's bells jingled at the door, and Theodora flew out. "Go right in and get warm, Auntie," she said briskly. "I'll take Ned away and unharness him." "It's a bitterly cold night," said Mrs. Martin wearily. There was a note of discouragement in her voice that struck dismay at Theodora's heart. "I'm afraid it means no Christmas for the children tomorrow," she said sadly. She led Ned away to the stable, and when she returned to the kitchen, Mrs. Martin was sitting by the fire. Her face was chilled in her hand, sobbing convulsively. "Oh, Auntie, don't!" exclaimed Theodora impulsively. It was such a rare thing to see her plucky, resolute little aunt in tears. "You're cold and you're tired. I'll have a nice cup of tea for you in a trice." "No, it isn't it," said Mrs. Martin brokenly. "It was seeing those stockings hanging up there, Theodora. I couldn't get a thing for the children, not a single thing. Mr. Porter would only give me $40 for the colt, and when all the bills were paid, There's barely enough for the necessities that we must have. I suppose I ought to feel thankful that I could get those, but the thought of the children's disappointment tomorrow is more than I can bear. It would have been better to told them long ago, but I keep building on and getting more for the court. Well, it's weak and foolish to give away like this. We better both take a cup of tea and go to bed. We can save some fuel that way. When Theodora went up to her little room, her face was very thoughtful. She took a small box from her table and carried it to the window. In it was a pretty gold locket that hung on a narrow blue ribbon. Theodora held it tenderly and looked out over the moonlit prairie with a very sober face. Could she give up her dear locket, the locket her dearest brother Donald had given her just before he started off for the Klondike? She'd never thought she could do such a thing. It was almost the only thing she had to remind her of her brother, the handsome, merry, impulsive, warm-hearted Donald who had gone away 4 years ago with a smile on his face and splendid hope in his heart. "Here's a locket for you, gift of God," he said gaily, as he had such a dear habit of calling her by the beautiful meaning of her name. A lump came into Theodora's throat as she remembered. "Couldn't afford a chain, too, but when I come back, I'll give you a rope of Klondike nuggets for it." Then he had gone away, and for 2 years the letters had come from him regularly. Then he wrote that he joined a prospecting party to a remote wilderness, and after that was silence, deepening into the anguish of suspense that finally ended in hopelessness. A rumor came that Donald Prentice was dead. None had returned from the expedition he had joined. Theodora had long ago given up hope of ever seeing her brother again. Hence her locket was doubly dear to her. But Aunt Elizabeth had always been so good, loving, and kind. Could she not make the sacrifice for her sake? She could, and she would. Theodora flung up her head with a great gesture that meant she had made a decision. She took out the locket, the bits of hair, her mother's and Donald's, which it contained, and then hastily donned her warmest cap and wraps. It was only 3 miles to Spencer, and she could walk it in an hour, and it was Christmas Eve, and the shops would still be open late. She would walk, well, because Ned could not be taken out again, for the horse's foot was sore. Besides, Aunt Elizabeth must not know until it was done. As stealthily as if she were bound on some nefarious errand, Theodora slipped downstairs and came out of the house. The next minute she was hurrying along the trail in the moonlight. The great dazzling prairie was around her, and the mystery and splendor of the northern night all about her. It was calm and cold, but Theodora walked so briskly that she kept warm. The trail from Red Butte to Spencer was a lonely one. Mr. Lurgan's house, halfway to town, was the only dwelling on the trip. When Theodora reached Spencer, she made her way at once to the jewelry store that the little town contained. Mr. Benson's owner had been a friend of her uncle's, and Theodora felt sure that he might buy her locket. Nevertheless, her heart beat quickly, and her breath came and went uncomfortably fast as she went in. Suppose he wouldn't buy it. There'd be no Christmas for the children at Red Butte this year, then. "Good evening, Miss Theodora," said Mr. Benson briskly. "What can I do for you?" "I'm afraid I'm not a very welcome sort of customer, Mr. Benson," said Theodora with an uncertain smile. "I want to sell, not buy." "Could you? Will you buy this locket?" Mr. Benson pursed up his lips and took the locket and examined it. "Well, I don't often buy second-hand stuff," he said after some reflection, "but I don't mind obliging you, Miss Theodora. I'll give you $4 for this trinket." Theodora knew the locket had cost a great deal more than that, but it's what she could get for it, and she dare not ask for more. In a few minutes, the locket was in Mr. Benson's possession, and Theodora, with 4 crisp bills in her purse, was hurrying to the toy store. Half an hour later, she was on her way back to Red Butte. As many parcels she could carry, Jimmy's skates and 2 lovely dolls for the twins, packages of nuts and candy, and a nice, plump turkey. Theodora beguiled her lonely tramp by picturing the children's joy in the morning. About a quarter of a mile past Mr. Lurgan's house, the trail curved suddenly about a bluff of poplars, and as Theodora rounded the turn, she halted in amazement. Almost at her feet, the body of a man was lying across the road. He was clad in a big fur coat and a fur cap pulled down well over his forehead and ears. Almost all of them that could be seen was a full, bushy beard. Theodora had no idea who he was or where he came from, but she realized that he was unconscious and that he would speedily freeze to death if he was not brought in. The footprints of a horse galloping across the prairie suggested a fall and a runaway, but Theodora did not waste time speculating. She ran back at full speed to Mr. Lurgan's house and roused the household. In a few minutes, Mr. Lurgan and his son had hitched a horse to a wood sleigh and hurried down the trail to this unfortunate man. Theodora, knowing that her assistance was not needed and that she ought to get home as quickly as possible, went on her way as soon as she had seen the stranger in safekeeping. When she reached the house, she crept in. Cautiously, she put the children's gifts in their stockings and placed the turkey on the table where Aunt Elizabeth would see it first thing in the morning, and then slipped off to bed, a very weary but very happy girl. The joy that reigned in the little log house the next morning was more than repaid to Theodora for her sacrifice. "Whoopee! Didn't I tell you that Santa Claus would come all right?" shouted the delighted Jimmy. "Oh, what splendid skates!" The twins hugged their doll in silent rapture, but Aunt Elizabeth's face was the best of all. Then dinner had to be prepared, and everyone had a hand in it. Just as Theodora gave a peep into the oven, announced the turkey was done, a sleigh dashed around the house. Theodora flew to answer the knock at the door, and stood there Mr. Lurgan, and a big, bewhiskered, fur-coated fellow who Theodora recognized as the stranger she'd found on the trail. But was he a stranger? There was something oddly familiar in those merry brown eyes. Theodora felt herself growing dizzy. "Donald? Donald?" And she was in the big fellow's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Donald it was indeed. And then followed a half an hour during which everyone talked at once, and the turkey would have been burned for a crisp if it not been for the presence of Mr. Lurgan, being the least excited of them all, took it out of the oven and set it back on the stove. "To think that it was you last night, and I never dreamed it," exclaimed Theodora. "Oh, Donald, if I hadn't gone to town." "I would have frozen to death, I'm afraid," he said soberly. "I got into Spencer in the last train last night, and I felt I must come right out. I couldn't wait till morning. But there wasn't a team to be got for love or money. It was just Christmas Eve, and the livery rigs were out, so I came on horseback. And just by that bluff, something frightened my horse, and he shied violently. I was half asleep thinking of my little sister, and I went off like a shot. I suppose he struck my head against a tree. Anyway, I knew nothing more until I came to in Mr. Lurgan's kitchen. Wasn't hurt much. Feel none the worse of it except a sore head and a shoulder. But oh, gift of God, how you have grown. I can't realize that you're the little sister I left 4 years ago. I suppose you've been thinking I was dead, huh?" "Yes, and Donald, where have you been?" "Well, I went up there with the prospecting party. We had a tough time that first year. We weren't in a country where post offices were lying around loose either, you see. And then at last we were given up in despair, and we struck it rich. I brought a snug little pile home with me, and things are going to look up for this log house, gift of God. There'll be no more worrying for you and the dear people over mortgages." "I'm so glad for Auntie's sake," said Theodora with shining eyes. "But oh, Donald, it's the best of all to have you back. I'm so perfectly happy that I don't know what to say or do." "Well, I think you might have to have dinner then," said Jimmy in an injured tone. "The turkey's getting stone cold, and I'm most starving, and I just can't stand it another minute." So with a laugh, they all sat down at the table and ate the merriest Christmas dinner the log house had ever known.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth.
Long lay the world in sin and ever pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its birth.
The thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born, oh, night divine, oh, night divine.
Led by the
so led by light of a star sweetly gleaming, here came the wise men from Orient way.
The King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger, in all our trials born to be our friend.
He knows our need, our weakness is no stranger. Behold your King, before him lowly bend. Behold your King, oh, lowly bend. He taught us to love one another. His heart is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is a brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus raise we, the Lord in us praise his holy name. Christ is the Lord. Oh, praise his name forever. His power and glory evermore to reign. His power and glory evermore proclaim. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born, oh, night divine, oh, night divine.
Let us pray. God, we give you thanks that we may be gathered as your people on this blessed Christmas morning. Awaken in us again the wonder and joy of the coming of the Christ child. May our remembrance of his birth fill us with light and life and love. May it give us the ability to care for all we encounter, to love with reckless abandon, to do the work you have called us to do because of this precious gift you offer us. May the blessings of those that found that first Christmas morning fill our hearts as well, and may we pour them out to help your people in all places and all times, that we may do the work you have called us each to do. Let us walk the path that Christ has laid before us, doing all we can to take care of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. May all we do be a gift. May all we do be done in love. It is because of your great love for us that we raise our voices together and pray as you taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And now, my friends, Christmas must continue. The joy must be shared. The love must be poured out. May this Christmas day give you an unending supply of love and compassion, of mercy and grace and forgiveness, that you may use those amazing gifts in all of the ways, in all of the people, in all of the things that go on in your life, that all may know the light of Christ through your love. Go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.